afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, trade agreements play a crucial role in unlocking the potential of an economy by various means, such as enhancing market access, fostering foreign investment, and stimulating growth. Now, that is a simple reason why the Center for Banking Studies of Central Bank of Sri Lanka thought of hosting expert panel discussion on this timely topic: trade agreements unlocking economic potential for Sri Lanka. Now, having said that, let me have the pleasure of welcoming all of you who are joining with our panel discussion from all over the country via Zoom and as well as on Facebook. And for this panel discussion, we have invited to a group of individuals who are very much conversant with this topic. It's our pleasure to have them on board with us today. We have Dr. 𝗲𝗲𝗵𝗹, Executive Director of Pathfinders Foundation, as the keynote speaker today. And we have Mr. 𝗃𝗵𝗶 𝗟𝘍𝗸, Director General of Department of Trade and Investment Policies of Ministry of Finance. And we have Dr. 𝗻𝗃𝗍𝗫, Senior Lecturer of Department of Economics of University of Colombo. And we have Mr. 𝗃𝗵𝗶 𝗟𝗍𝗸, Secretary General and CEO of Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, joining as panelists for this discussion. We warmly welcome all of you, sir. And today's panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. 𝗃𝗍𝗫 𝗍𝗔𝗫. She's currently serving as team lead of the Real Sector Division of the Economic Research Department of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, having previously served in the Modeling and Forecasting Division and International and Finance and International Relations Division. So with that introduction, let me hand over controls of the panel discussion to Pungo. Pungo, over to you.
Thanks, Kushan, for that warm introduction. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Kushan rightly said, today's topic is both timely and crucial. And so firstly, let me welcome you again to this panel discussion organized by the Center for Banking Studies of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka on the topic of trade agreements, unlocking economic potential for Sri Lanka. So after all, trade agreements are not merely legal instruments, but they're also strategic tools that can drive economic transformation. And for a nation like Sri Lanka that is rich in resources, natural resources, and human capital, these agreements represent significant opportunities for growth, competitiveness, and sustainable development. However, realizing these benefits, the benefits of trade agreements, as in the access to new markets, increased foreign investment, innovation, and job creation, hinges on the nuanced understanding of both the opportunities and also the challenges that come with trade agreements. So therefore, the art of negotiating trade agreements and bringing them to finalization stage, it's perhaps a tightrope walk of ensuring our interests, our national interests, while enhancing our global trade footprint. So today's session will help us explore how Sri Lanka has strategically navigated and looks forward to leveraging trade agreements to unlock their full economic potential and, of course, the country's economic potential as well. So today we are fortunate to have with us Dr. 𝗲𝗲𝗵𝗹 𝗟𝗍𝗸, Executive Director, Pathfinder Foundation, as the keynote speaker. Before I invite him to speak, let me introduce him. He is an international trade economist with over 30 years of experience handling trade and economic policy matters, including trade facilitation. He earned a Bachelor of Commerce degree honors with first class from the University of Peradeniya. He possesses several postgraduate qualifications, including a PhD in economics from the University of Melbourne and a master's degree in international economics from the University of London. He currently serves as the Executive Director of Pathfinder Foundation, prior to which he worked for the International Trade Center in Geneva as the National Project Coordinator of the EU-Sri Lanka Trade-Related Assistance Project. He served as a Senior Economic Affairs Officer or Deputy Head attached to the Sub-Regional Office of 𝗀𝗎𝗓 in New Delhi. He also served as Director of Commerce at the Department of Commerce and has also served as Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka to the WTO in Geneva. During his illustrious career at the Department of Commerce, spanning over 2.5 decades, he handled various duties, including overseeing and safeguarding Sri Lanka's interest in multilateral negotiations in WTO, at the World Trade Organization, UNCTAD, ITC, GSP, GSTP, SAARC, and BIMSTEC. Needless to say, Dr. Silva has extensive knowledge of trade policy-related matters spanning over decades, including the EU GSP, trade facilitation, trade capacity development, and trade promotion. So we could not have picked a better person to talk to us about trade agreements today. So with that introduction, may I invite our keynote speaker for today, Dr. 𝗲𝗓𝗛 Silva. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Mrs. 𝗲𝗓𝗛, for your detailed introduction. And really, first of all, I would like to thank the Center for Banking Studies of Central Bank of Sri Lanka for inviting for this panel discussion. It is a great pleasure to join with distinguished panelists, Mr. 𝗲𝗵𝗟, then we have the Mr. 𝗵𝗵 and Dr. Ganesh Murthy, the veteran on the subjects more than me, and to share my view on this important topic, trade agreement unlocking the potential. Now, as the introduction made by Kushan, now this topic has come to the forefront of the public debate today among the civil society and policymakers for a number of reasons. Firstly, the current government has embarked on a long-term program to establish FTAs with a number of countries, mainly from the Asian region. And there's a clear policy agenda in entering into FTAs with new trading partners. For example, last year, government sent a letter of intent to join a mega regional organization like RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And secondly, as I understand, negotiations are underway with several countries like China, India, even Indonesia recently, and the Bangladesh. So as I understand, current government believes that the FTA agenda will pave the way for deepening economic integration with the rest of the world. The government of Sri Lanka has publicly announced this policy to establishing FTA, believing such an effort will be crucial to ensure Sri Lanka's stability and the prevent from future downturn. Thirdly, there is a global factor. Globally, trade agreements have influenced the relationship between the many countries. I will reflect on later. In this context, critical questions that need to be raised are: one, whether these agreements would bring meaningful benefits to Sri Lanka. Could these agreements lay a solid foundation for a vibrant and competitive export sector in Sri Lanka to drive country towards a sustainable growth? Should signing of these agreements be a policy priority? Hope we would be able to address these questions during our deliberation. This is a brief structure of my presentation. First, trade agreements should be understood within the broad framework of trade policy. So I'll briefly touch upon the relationship between the trade agreement and the trade policy. Second, regional trade agreement or free trade agreement have today become an integral part of the multilateral trading system, and I will briefly explain the evolution of the RTS under the WTO. Then, as I mentioned before, rationale for FTA expectation by the government of Sri Lanka. And finally, I will give a very brief overview of the free trade agreement that Sri Lanka has signed. Trade policy. What is trade policy? Trade policy is a set of rules set by the government to regulate the exchange of goods between the countries. Trade policy provides a framework for a country's overall approach to conduct of international trade. Trade policy is also an important, critical component of the overall development strategy of a country. Trade policy and trade agreements are interconnected, intertwined. Trade agreements, by definition, they are formal contract between the two or more countries that details a specific trade regulation. The latter, trade agreement, therefore is a subset of the trade policy. Trade agreement, if I may explain, is an instrument that put policy into action. These agreements are also a reflection of the underlying trade policies that participating nations adopt. There is today, across the globe, there is a great deal of interdependencies between the countries in terms of economic and trade relations. See, good example is global supply chain, manufacturing, production network. So these instrument trade agreements are widely used to manage this ever-increasing, evolving interdependencies between the countries. Now, these agreements have influenced the pattern of trade, volume of trade, as well as the production and the consumption. What are the trade policy instruments? It should be read as a policy instrument. I'm sorry about that, there's a mistake. There are two types of policy instruments. One is price-related measures, such as tariff, para-tariff, MFN tariff, applied tariff, or what you call preferential tariff, bound tariff. These are the WTO jargon. I'm sure you all are familiar with. And also the anti-dumping duties and countervailing. These all are what we call the price-related measures. And on the other side, there are non-price measures, what we call broadly NTMs, quotas, technical measures like product standards, technical standards, and SPS standard. Using these measures, countries can pursue two different types of trade policies. Either to promote free trade or to adopt protectionism policies. We popularly call them as inward-looking policies or outward-looking policies. Now, free trade aims to, by definition, remove barriers to trade, either unilaterally, bilaterally, or multilaterally. The desirability of the free trade is one school of thought. There are others as well. This is indeed the philosophy advocated by IMF, World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. And this was the view after the World War II, when Western leaders launched and established what we call the General Agreement to Tariff and Trade in 1947. I will come back to that later. This policy of free trade promote or eliminate tariff, eliminate quotas, and eliminate subsidies between the countries. Now, these areas have become under the scrutiny of the World Trade Organization. From the theoretical perspective, free trade or outward-looking policies can lead to lower prices for consumers and business, and it can also encourage economic growth. However, it can also lead to job losses in industries that are not competitive with the foreign global producers. On the other hand, protectionist policies or inward-looking policies is the other extreme. A country can adopt such policy measures by not participating in any trade agreement, not introducing any reforms or liberalization, aiming to protect domestic industry from foreign competition. This was the philosophy that was abundantly prevailed in the 17th and 18th century. The predominant argument at the time or thinking was that a successful nation should export more than it imports, that the trade surplus should be used to expand nation treasure. This school of thought is popularly known as the mercantilism. Mercantilist approach to trade. One popular figure was Thomas Dunn, director of British East India, who has said that to sell more strangers yearly than we consume there in value. His intention was to have a bigger army. Now, we have to think the validity of this 17th century argument in modern world, where there is a greater interdependency on production and consumption patterns. So inward-looking policies or the mercantilist approach will lead to increasing tariff or using subsidies like many developed countries did. These policy areas have come to the discussion even today in Sri Lanka. Now, the choice between these two policy options is a complex one. Hence, entering into a trade agreement are debatable one. There is no what you call the one size fits for all. Whether free trade agreement is the best option or the inward-looking policies is the best option. This is a policy dilemma that we are discussing today. Has to grapple with all of us. How we contend with or deal with these policy parameters entirely depend on countries' development policy priority. For example, if a country wants to create competitive export industries, then obviously country has to create a policy environment that promote competitive environment and free trade. Trade agreements are considered as one path to reinforce trade reforms. Now, next slide. This is just to give you a basic introduction. There are three pillars of trade policy. One is the export policy, import policy, and the trade policy. Now, when you import policy, you can decide unilaterally on your own. For example, during the COVID-19 period, government banned imports, introduced various restrictions. Then if a country are entering into FTAs or are a member of the WTO, then your imports should adhere to provisions of those agreements. This is basically the key policy option that a country has to think of when you are introducing your own policy option. Export policy, well, I am not going to go into this detail. You have the supply side capacity, trade promotion, and getting into the global value chain. That's what the topic, but just to introduce that aspect of trade policy. Next one. Now, let me tell you, go to my next slide, next topic. RTAs in the multilateral trading system. Now, before 19th century, so early part of 20th century, bilateralism was clearly dominant. For example, England took lead much of this activity, and later US adopted bilateralism in 1930s. US made a big push to reciprocal regional trading agreement. But immediately after the Second World War, multilateralism grew faster. Again, most recently, bilateralism has returned to the more popular policy option for the countries. Now, multilateralism as a policy option for the nation began with the famous, what you call the Bretton Woods Conference, where need for economic security was emphasized. Two institutions was established, World Bank and IMF. Then there is negotiators at that time realized the need for a third organization, what you call the International Trade Organization, but it never realized due to various political argument between the US and the American kind of blockade to establish the ITO. So the 1947, therefore, that instead of the ITO, 1947, this GATT was established. GATT treaty created set of rules to govern the trade among about 23 nations. Since then, about 8 rounds of trade negotiation were conducted. Early part of, until the, I don't want to go into detail, until the Tokyo round, bulk of the discussions were on the tariff, but later in the Uruguay round, other areas of trade were brought into the WTO discipline, and the WTO was established in 1995. These are very famous rules of the WTO: non-discrimination, the MFN, and the national treatment, and other reciprocity and transparency. Now, under the MFN rule, as we know, member countries requires to give equal treatment with regard to trade barriers to all GATT members. However, negotiators at the time recognized the role of regional integration that would allow members of a trade bloc to eliminate barriers on trade among themselves. With that objective in mind, a discriminatory tariff on imports from members were provided in 3 sets of WTO rules. That's Article 24 of the agreement and the enabling clause, which came 1979 to facilitate the preferential trade among developing countries and developed countries, and the for the services sector, GATT's Article 5. There are, well, basically RTAs establish either under Article 24 or enabling clause, or for that matter, GATS, complement the multilateral trading system. They can take various forms. Now today, it's become a key feature in international trade relation. What we can observe is over the years, RTAs have not only increased in number, but also in depth. There are two schools of thought. One says not helpful, this RTAs. It is a stumbling block for the free trade. And other side of the argument is the building block for free trade. There are three types of global trade integration: global or preferential and unilateral. Next. Now, this graph, you can get it from the WTO website. As you can see, the scope of the RTAs have expanded to cover from traditional goods to include the services, investment, etc. They play a crucial role today. One clear factor is, since they stopped, if you can see from 1995 onwards, number of FTAs entered among the countries has exploded. More than 100 nations and many different types of agreement. Famous economist Baldwin state that regionalism is sweeping the world trade system like a wildfire. Another famous economist, 𝗏𝗏 is of the view that regionalism is a threat to the multilateral trade system. What are the reasons for this wildfire? That is the exploding the RTS from 1996 up to 2024. Nations are so eager to remove barriers to trade bilaterally because the slow multilateralism. This is the assertion. Therefore, regionalism is spreading because of the multilateral talks are progressing very slowly. Then there are other reasons, what we call the idiosyncratic events. US started negotiating FTA with Canada, then the breakup of USSR, and it's also Asian crisis. So these are some of the reasons justifying the bilateral trade deals. Now, if you, next slide, please. You can see today total number of RTS in force are almost 361. There are different categories. Biggest component is the free trade agreement and the custom union like European Union or ASEAN is reaching that state, a small amount. Free trade agreements are increasing and it is exploding. Now, this is a very interesting diagram which I got it from the WTO. So who are the biggest users of the trade agreement? When I use this RTAs, please understand this is what is WTO use. It also includes the FTAs, free trade agreement. European Union, the European-based countries are the biggest users of the RTAs. Now here you can see the number 26. That is really not the West Asia. That is the term the WTO use. Is the South Asia. After the Caribbean, South Asian region is the lowest using FTA country. Recent phenomena is East Asia also entering into among themselves in a big way, signing free trade agreement. Next. So this is the number. Europe about 165. On top of the bottom of the graph, you can see it is South Asia, just 26. Next slide. And Sri Lanka has, according to the, and we know what they are, has signed only 6 FTAs, right? Singapore has signed more than nearly 28 agreements. And on bottom half of the graph, you can say East Asian countries has signed more FTAs than the South Asian countries, except India. They have entered into 19 trade agreements. Therefore, Sri Lanka is lagging behind in entering into the free trade agreement. Next. Now, what are the expectations of the, this is my next topic, of the rationale for pursuit of free trade agreement. Like many countries, there have been several motivations for Sri Lanka to enter into FTA. Is that the feeling of left behind feeling, or left behind feeling, or getting into the bandwagon as other countries do? These are some of the criticism. But contrary to which, one strong belief is that government of Sri Lanka believe that with limited domestic market, trade can help. Trade can boost economic growth by increasing trade between countries. So therefore, integration into the global economy has become a part of the trade policy agenda of the government. Now, have we integrated into the global economy in the past? Now, this is, you can measure with a ratio called the trade openness. Can I show, let me show you the trade openness, how this is measured as a trade as a percentage of the GDP, and you can see how Sri Lanka has progressed in terms of the trade openness. In 2000, 77, this ratio was about 77. Now come down to, in 2009, 20, came down to almost less than 30%. And you can compare this with the other countries. This is how the trade openness of the Vietnam. So to achieve, to integrate more into the global economy, Sri Lanka, to come to Thailand or Vietnam level, right? We need to have a strategy, well-founded strategy to integrate into the global economy. Can you go back, please? Right. So that's the one rationale. And another one is, the trade agreements are signed for a variety of reasons. Sometimes strategic reason to achieve the foreign policy objective and the for trade and economic objective. I can recall United States of America signed their first FTAs with some small nation in Middle East. That is for strategic reason. So strategic reason, countries can sign FTAs. And another objective the government has publicly announced is expanding access to new market, promote trade. Now these are laudable objectives, undoubtedly. But success depends on number of factors, the rules of origin, product coverage. Product coverage means, if you sign FTAs excluding the actual trade goods being traded, that agreement will not be successful. Now, this is a criticism leveled against the recently concluded Thai FTA, but it is there is a long-term liberalization trade program. And the most importantly, supply side capacity of the country. Now, can you go to EU-GSP Plus? Now here is a 2099, 9 to 2022, 2019, our GSP utilization. Sri Lanka is one of the lowest. Sri Lanka, 2/3 of Sri Lanka's exports are qualified to receive zero duty treatment. But this is another unilateral FTA. But we have failed to get the full benefit of the EU GSP plus with as reflected in the utilization rate. Now here, I'm just comparing where Bangladesh was and where Sri Lanka was. I remember I was in Brussels at the time, and our total trade exposed to European Union is 3.6 billion. Still, we are at the 4 billion. But whereas the Bangladesh export has increased tremendously, now today, almost 24 billion worth of product going. Next. So therefore, we have a rationale. At the same time, it is important to need to have a comprehensive policy framework assessing the cost and benefits of free trade agreement. I don't know whether I'm running behind time. If next one. Okay. So therefore, what we need a comprehensive policy framework, national development framework, comprising overall development strategy with sectoral plan. I mean, this is an industrial policy factor. Conduct thorough impact assessment on the cost and the benefit, and select FTA partners carefully, matching complementarities, export profile and the import profile. And another important factor is the strengthen the institutional capacity to organize effective, capable negotiating team. I know that Sri Lanka has a very good negotiating team. One member is already there. But when there are so many FTAs are to be negotiated, I think the negotiating capacity of the team is very much limited. I haven't read in full. Economic transformation bill is prepared towards that direction to strengthen the institutional capacity building. And most importantly, involve and consult all the stakeholders, local firms, trade unions, farmers, or even the consumers, before you decide on a trade agreement with another country, because there are wide-ranging effects on the society. This is a strong institutions are critical for ensuring the benefit of trade agreement are maximized and negative consequences are mitigated. Right. Next one. Now, just to quickly go through, give me another just 5 minutes. These are the free trade agreement that Sri Lanka has entered into, 4 bilateral and several FTAs. And I don't have time to go into much detail of the performance of these agreements. In fact, out of the 4 FTAs, one is yet to be implemented, Thai-Sri Lanka FTA. The only trade agreement fully implemented is the Indo-Lanka Free Trade Agreement. And there are criticism always we hear is this agreement has not given any benefit to the country. Right. Therefore, before I go to the assessment of this FTA, now another important factor is the Sri Lanka has submitted its intention, expressed its intention to join RCEP. RCEP is an important regional body comprising, the 2/3 of the world population to one-third of the global trade, and is an important trade agreement if we have chance to get access to the RCEP. Next. Please not go ahead. So that's next one, please. Now, I just want to reflect on the assessment performance of the Sri Lanka-India Free Trade Agreement. You can see Sri Lanka, India is the most important market of South Asia. India, our total trade is reached about 5.2 billion, and India share in the South Asia is more than 44%. Next. Now, this is a very important graph. What you can say, India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement under the IFCTA, the trade coverage is only 14% total trade. But when you compare who benefit most, well, the criticism is India exports coming to Sri Lanka is exported because of the IFCTA. That is not the case. Less than 5%, according to the latest figure, that coming under the FTA. And Sri Lankan export enjoy 4% of export. Now, this is the picture. I would not surprise of these results because the ambitions of the ISFTA was very low. Most of the goods traded were excluded from the trade agreement. Therefore, expected outcome would be the lowest performance. Next. Let me finally conclude. Overall, decision of whether to sign FTA is a complex one. There are both potential benefits and also drawbacks to consider. Therefore, it is very important to weigh the evidence carefully before deciding. Secondly, selecting the right trading partner of FTAs. At the minimum, trade compatibility matching the export profile and import profile of partner countries should be assessed. The outcome of the FTAs or unilateral reform crucially depend on our supply side reform. Even with the effective supply side reform, the impact of the FTA depends crucially on the trade compatibility. So you should not feel this fear of being left behind. There is a fear that those countries that are entering into the FTA will gain competitive edge and thus leave those that don't join the FTA. I don't think we should be guided in this feeling. Should not get into the bandwagon simply because others do. Make your own assessment before signing. Finally, free trade agreement is not a panacea to our problem. Thank you. I'm sorry I have taken so much of time, but I have to present all these facts before you. Thank you.
Yeah, that was quite a Herculean task, I think, for you, Dr. Dsararatne, what CBS has set for you, having to bring across a lot of thoughts and, starting from the basics of what trade agreements are, their intuition, the different schools of thought that underpin trade agreements, and the prevalence or use and the usage of trade agreements, the case of Sri Lanka. And of course, I enjoyed the concluding slide. So perhaps some of these aspects we can draw on during the panel discussion that we will open up. So thank you so much for your insights and very detailed thoughts, Dr. Dayaratne. So with that, we will open the panel discussion, which will also comprise the Q&A session. So let me also invite the audience to present or to leave us with some, come out with their questions on trade agreements as we are discussing today. Please use the Q&A box, which is available on Zoom and which will be enabled shortly. And hopefully we will feature some of those questions and we will be able to ask them from our panelists today. And before we get into the discussion, let me also warmly welcome our panelists again for today and introduce them briefly. We have with us Mr. K.A. Vimalendra, who is an accomplished officer of the SLAS with over 29 years of public service experience. He currently serves as the Director General of the Department of Trade and Investment Policy. Mr. Vimalendra is an attorney at law and holds a special degree in economics from the University of Jaffna, a Master of Philosophy in Economics from the University of 𝗵𝗹, and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Moratuwa. His extensive career includes roles such as Director General of the Department of Fiscal Policy, Senior Assistant Secretary in charge of Administrative Reforms, Chief Information Officer of the Ministry of Public Administration and Home Affairs, and Minister's Counselor at the Sri Lankan Embassy in Beijing, China. He is also a commissioner of the Colombo Port City Economic Commission, a member of the Board of Directors of the Export Development Board, and an observer at the Board of Directors of the Board of Investment. We also have with us today Dr. M. Ganeshamurthy, who graduated with the BA Honors in Economics from the University of 𝗵𝗹, followed by a Master of Arts in Economics from the University of Colombo, and a PhD in Finance from the Catholic University of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. Over the last 3 decades, he has been affiliated with the University of Colombo, where he has served as the director of the Colombo University Community Extension Center. And also, he has also served as the director of postgraduate studies of the Faculty of Arts and continues to be a highly sought after resource person in the field of economics. Today's last but not least, our panelist is Mr. 𝗀𝗍𝗶 𝗟𝗍𝗸, who is the CEO and Secretary General of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. He's a veteran professional banker with over 4 decades of experience in the financial sector in Sri Lanka. He's an established leader in corporate banking and has extensive experience in investment and merchant banking. Mr. 𝗍𝗍𝗶 has held positions as Board Director of NDB Investment Bank Limited, Acting Chief Executive Officer of National Development Bank, and served for 14 years as Head of Corporate Banking at NDB in the capacity of Senior Vice President. He holds a BSc in Financial Services from the University of Manchester, a postgraduate diploma in Bank Financial Management from the University of Sri Javadhanapura, and is an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Bankers and an associate member of Certified Management Accountants Sri Lanka. He is also a past president of the Association of Professional Bankers Sri Lanka and a past chairman of the Bankers Association Technical Advisory Committee. So we have an esteemed set of panelists today, and we will open the panel discussion with some opening remarks from our panelists, followed by the Q&A session as you all prepare as the audience who has joined us today prepares with their questions. Our panelists will deliver their opening remarks. So may I start by inviting Mr. Vimalendra to present his opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity for the Center for Banking Studies. I think there may be a overlapping certain facts with Dr. Dayaratne, but I try to see from my perspective how I understood these facts while we explaining. So I'm going to start and set some idea why we are embarked on the free trade agreement, so some sort of integrating the country into the global and regional value chain. So if I take the current situation from the crisis background, why we need to go for a free trade agreement? So why try to integrate Sri Lanka into the global and the regional value chain? First thing we had to see, if we want to ensure the sustainable economic recovery, require non-debt creating inflows where we can get it, trade and the foreign direct investment. And also there should be a issue, I will show some graph later, there should be a sustainable economic growth through the productivity enhancement. Because we see that in average with other countries, our productivity is not up to the standard of the developing countries. And also today the trade is expanding as part of the global and regional value chain. Therefore, we can't stand alone and try to say only the finished product we will send it. So now we need to embark as a intra-industry trade providers as well as becoming the inevitable player. Now you can see certain company in Sri Lanka, they are very crucial in famous automobile and other engineering industries globally, we can see. And also you can see the FTA, the free trade agreement in Sri Lanka. Basically, you can see the unpredictability and inconsistency policy is one of the problems for all perspective. So the free trade agreement is one of the instruments, as Dr. 𝗲𝗏 mentioned, can create some sort of a predictability and the certainty in the policy environment, which enable the local domestic firms to integrate into the global value chain. Because these, when you come to the FTAs, we have some sort of a mutually committed or binding process, and also building the investors and the traders' confidence. And finally, not for the last, Sri Lanka being island, around 22 million economy with the around $300 million worth of purchasing power parity basis. So we can declare as a small market economy. So within this small market economy, having efficiency or the competitiveness not the easy task. So therefore, we need to improve the economies of scale and specialization by expanding our market. And also we need to attract some market and efficiency seeking foreign direct investment to the country, not the polluting investments. And also we can, I think Dr. 𝗲𝗏 mentioned one point that we are underutilizing our existing concessionary market access. So standalone basis, it may be difficult for Sri Lanka to achieve those markets or fully utilize. Therefore, we had to cooperate and compete to achieve those or to utilize those existing concessionary market access, as we said, the GSP+. Now here you can see in this graph what I'm trying to say. 𝗲𝗏 also mentioned from the different perspective. I'm comparing our GDP and the trade. If you look at the beginning from 77 to 2022, at the beginning you can see both have a similar pattern, the positive pattern. But if you can see from 29 onwards, we can see the GDP is picking up while trade is remaining as it is in the fluctuating manner. It is, you can see, but we have done during that period, we invested heavily on non-tradable item, which alleged to be one of the reasons for present, but 22 we have experienced together with other factors. And also you can see how this policy reversal in Sri Lanka taking place. Again, I'm taking the period from 1977 to 2022. You can see how our trade openness coming down. I think Dr. 𝗲𝗏 mentioned one point, but I'm taking this in comparison to the state revenue from the trade. So now when we try to collect more revenue from the trade, we are compromising the trade. In other way, we also compromising our growth trajectory to our fiscal requirement, where we have lived beyond our means. So this is one of the place we can see. In generally, the experts are now calling Sri Lanka has made a policy reversal since 2000 onwards. That you can see in the graph itself, it is reflecting. And also, this is one of the graph generated by the World Bank, where you can see they have pointed out two things. One is, yes, our export is grow, but it is not the stability basis. Now you can see in the second graph, until 2000, our export to GDP ratio has recorded a positive growth. Afterwards, I think Dr. 𝗲𝗏 mentioned 37%. Yes, we are coming down to the lower. That is where we are behind our peer economies in the region. So these all indicating, but we have a capacity, but we are sometimes misusing that capacity. That you can see in this graph. That again identified by the estimated by the World Bank. But they are saying now the green color in a way that is we have used the export capacity. The red color we have not utilized. That is, we say untapped potential export capacity. It is amounting to per annum around $10 million. So therefore, if we want to use this capacity, where you can see that we have not used the capacity of the EU GSP plus, because we are not exporting, though we have the capacity. So underutilization of the export capacity is one of the issues in the economy. And here you can see how this Sri Lanka and Vietnam performing in the case of export. They took the $10,000 of world export and compare Sri Lanka and Vietnam from 2001 and 2021. You can see in 2001, Sri Lanka contributed for $8 to the $10,000, where Vietnam contributed $23. But when you come to 2021, Sri Lanka from $8 to $5, but Vietnam has increased from $23 to $122. So now you can see the difference between these two countries. So now in that case, how we can track our Sri Lankan economy. So now that is what we see, that we have to interconnect to the global economy, where the public sector also need to mobilize towards the economic mainstreaming process. So for this process, we can use unilateral approach, bilateral approach, and multilateral approach. These two we have explained. I think 2017 we started unilateral approach, and 94 and prior to that got also Sri Lanka in the multilateral approach. Now only we have to embark on the bilateral approach, because that is a prominent dimension in the global integration or regional integrations. Now here you can see what are the challenges we are facing, the pre and the post economic crisis. When I listed out these factors, I couldn't see a big difference between the pre and the post economic crisis, because we are remaining the same. But only two things I have changed. Now you can see lack of product diversification in the export basket, import substitution, industries domination, policy incentive towards domestic market, oligopoly market structure, predominantly bureaucracy-centric public organization, lack of trade and industry infrastructure, political economy and policy reversal, lesson learned from the past FTAs, business perception toward FTAs, and lack of forced FTA follow-ups, etc. Pre-crisis we have experienced. But again, if you look at the same factors from the post-economic crisis period, I see only two things are changing, others are still remaining the same. One is the public servants, my perception coming out from, because they now bit of a sensitized towards the economic elements. And also you can see the business perception towards FTA also a bit improved, because when we have the stakeholder consultation, they are favored to the some sort of a regional integrations rather than focusing on the domestic market. So these are the challenges we can see, the pre and the post economic crisis in Sri Lanka towards integrating our economy into the, or integrating the domestic enterprises to the local foreign market. And also, when we take the challenges with the FTA partners, we are embark on the FTAs and the Sri Lanka also, we have a become some sort of peculiar or some sort of backward status here. You can see we have a complex duty structure, but in those countries, very transparent and a simple duty structure, because they are only focused on the custom duty. But in our case, we have a number of duties on the border, and policy inconsistency is another dimension in Sri Lanka. But in those countries, policy consistency is the good element, and lack of preparatory studies and the learning of, as Mr. 𝗍𝗗 mentioned, now other countries are 28 and more than 10 FTAs. We are just 2-3 FTAs, that also in a discrete basis. Therefore, we have the learning curve issue also. But those countries are many empirical studies and public awareness, and lack of contribution from the academia and the research institute on this public policy making also you can see in Sri Lanka. But in those countries, they are very much contributing to the research. Even in Bangladesh, you can see the universities and the research institute, they are very much contributing the public policy making. And lack of understanding and among the stakeholder because of the lack of information. And also you can see the domain now in those countries, you can see most of the economies are export oriented, and the culture they are enjoying. And import substitution industry, they are having some sort of a vast export basket and limited good. And also the fiscal revenue dependency on the trade taxes in Sri Lanka is one of the elements, but they are not depending on the trade taxes to collect their revenues. And lack of readiness in Sri Lanka from the public service as well as the private sector and all elements. But in those countries, they are very much because they are standing for more than 3-4 decades on this standard. That's where we have to looking for. I think that Dr. Ďarekna talked about already in this one. Now, I just listed out these facts based on the Thailand FTA, how we can get the benefit. One, as I mentioned, the policy consistency and the predictability. More than that, we are now access to a good market, Thailand market, to get zero duty or lower rated raw material, intermediate goods and capital goods for our people. And there is a possibility because Thailand is one of the countries which is grown based on the joint venture with other developed countries. So the Thailand entrepreneurs are mostly favored to a joint venture investment in those countries. So these all since talk about, I'm not going. And also I say the labor welfare improvement. I'll show the next slide for that element. You can see here in the case of Sri Lanka, this World Bank estimated value added per worker in the agriculture, you can see we are below the middle income, upper middle income and the lower middle income. And also in the industry also you can see improve. So if we can improve their productivity, the labor welfare can...
I need to ask you to kind of fast track through your presentation a little bit so that
I'll do it.
Thank you.
So, and also I would say that when I say trade in goods, it is not the trade in goods. It is basically when we say trade in goods or FTA, it is not the free market access. It's only the preferential market access because we had to comply with the rules of origin, custom procedure, TBT and SPS as well. So the stakeholder have three type of concern to my understanding. One is the lack of understanding on the FTA process because of the lack of information. So where are the mechanisms, stakeholder consultations, sharing information, the feasibility study, and threat of increased import goods, another concern from the stakeholders where we can see backloading the tariff liberalization, inclusion of negative and sensitive list, harmonization of standard and regulations, and trade adjustment package. And safeguard measures, of course, in the FTAs are not disturbing any safeguard measures. We have the global, bilateral, special, and the institutional arrangement. So this is what I want to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vibhendra, for those opening remarks. Can I invite Dr. Ganeshamurthy to deliver his opening remarks? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I think I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So therefore, let me directly say this because I don't have a presentation to make, but I will be more brief and stick to the 10 minutes timeline. Now, we are in a world right now which is not a kind of a world that we were living in 50, 60 years ago. Competition is so high, and also the partners or the trading partners are also very much competitive and very much so keen in developing their countries through export-led growth. So in this regard, trade liberalization has been considered as one of the major platforms. They can launch their exports and get the benefit of free trade. And some argue that the unilateral trade liberalization would be beneficial. What the other countries are doing is not a matter, something like that. But here, the world what we are living is not suitable to that. So therefore, we have multilateral trade liberalization, plurilateral trade liberalization, such as regional trade liberalization and bilateral trade liberalization. Now, under the WTO, the multilateral trade liberalization has come under a kind of a `impasse with the Doha round, because the Doha round is now continuing, but without any kind of a negotiation and settlement. And recently, we came to know that the most important, the tooth of the WTO, which is the dispute settlement body, is now redundant because the council failed to agree on members to that particular council. So therefore, multilateral trade liberalization has come to a serious attack by various initiatives. And one initiative in the international arena, the trade war between China and US in the past. So Donald Trump said we want to settle these issues outside the WTO and impose trade barriers, bypassing the WTO's preview. So therefore, this has created a trade war kind of a situation. The fear was raising that the the world will go back to a kind of a trade war like which was happening in the 1930s. Like, fortunately, it didn't happen in that way. In place of that, the regional trade liberalization and bilateral trade liberalization came to the forefront. So that is the reason why the surging of trade liberalization and at the plurilateral level and the bilateral level. In 2024, there were 369 regional trade agreements were signed and notified. The total figure was since 1948 up to now, the total number has surged up to 607. So this is a kind of a situation that we are seeing right now. There are only 200 countries in the world, but 607 negotiations were notified. And currently we are having 369 active regional trade agreements. So whenever we see this trade, free trade, it is not just trade liberalization, but it is investment liberalization, and also the other policy liberalization is also happening at various levels. One of the best articulated trade liberalization or the regional integration was the EU. So they have 4 principles. One is the opening the people, opening investment, and opening trade and services. So this is going to go in a deeper way, encompassing just trade liberalization. And when you look at the South Asian region, as a region, we are only having this intra-regional trade 5%, whereas the ASEAN countries, they are having 25%. When you compare this to EU region, almost 70% of their trade is intra-regional trade. So they are trade within the region. So in this regard, the recently concluded RCEP agreement and Sri Lanka's candidacy for that particular RCEP by wider scale trade liberalization as well as investment liberalization program would be a good initiative for Sri Lanka to start with. And then our issue is Sri Lanka's trade liberalization process started in 1978, much longer than any country in the Asian region. But for different reasons, policy inconsistencies and well understood reasons, which are already highlighted by previous presenters, Sri Lanka did not go beyond certain limits, especially after 2005. Our trade liberalization efforts were completely ruined by the inward-looking policies, the so-called under the bandwagon of building national economy. So the building national economy had gone to the level of producing for the local market and not producing for the tradable items. And this is one of the reasons why we couldn't even reap the benefit of the Indo-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement. So India is not using the Indo-Sri Lanka agreement clauses to send their exports to Sri Lanka. Only 5% they are using, whereas we are using more than 65%. It means that even after so many years after liberalization, Sri Lanka's products are not competitive in the Indian market, whereas the Indian products are more competitive in the Sri Lankan market. So it indicates that just merely opening or signing free trade agreements will not produce any kind of a palpable benefits unless there is a change, profound change in the production structure, and particularly in the tradable sector, and also improving productivity in the local economy. And as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, our industrial sector happen to be mostly or predominantly SMEs. So SMEs and small businesses. So therefore, how this SME sector is going to cope with this free trade agreements is a serious question one might ask. And then the SME sector performance in the past, especially during the COVID pandemic time and the economic crisis time, were not very impressive. So there so many SMEs were closed down. So how are we going to face with this international situation and regional situations? Now we know that the there are efforts to join in various FTAs. I think Sri Lanka has 6 currently active FTAs, and then another 5 or 6 they are negotiating, 4 or 5 at the preparation level. So therefore, the country is pushing hard towards engaging into this larger groups and get benefit out of the access to the market. And even if your markets are there, you have to produce to access the market. No, that's the major issue here. So it's not just accessing to the market, but improving the productive capacity of the economy. And based on that, the country's exports should go into the intended market. But there again, the problem of rule of origin will crop up, because the rule of origin clause of the RTAs may be a problem for countries, especially the countries with the SME sector dominant. Because there was researchers conducted by various institutions highlight that the larger part of the SME sectors are not utilizing the rule of origin clause and get benefit out of the regional free trade agreements. So therefore, these are certain issues that we will be facing, even if we sign free trade agreements with our intended trading partners. Beyond that, the free trade agreements are signed by bilateral basis also. The bilateral basis may be providing certain benefit for both countries, but there are criticisms leveled against the bilateral trade liberalization agreements as well. So free trade agreements can be coming from various modes. Can be bilateral, it can be plurilateral, it can be multilateral. So the multilateral trade liberalization has gone right now. Free trade is not a kind of a multilateral basis. So now growing at the regional level and bilateral level. So as a country just struggling to coming up or stand from the crisis, Sri Lanka has to carefully design its policies, especially the productive sector. The production sector has to be revamped. Just signing off the free trade agreements and waiting for benefits will not help. There should be a coordinated effort from the productive sector and also trade sector with a well-coordinated team, which is necessary at the time. I think I can say and answer the questions later.
Yeah. I think you took the liberty of answering some of the questions that have been posed by our participants, our audience, and also some of the questions that I had in mind. So I think you've kickstarted the Q&A session from your end. But let me also invite in the meanwhile Mr. 𝗃𝗏 to deliver his opening remarks. And also I want to ask, sir, if you can to touch on, as part of your opening remarks, perhaps to touch on how so as we are striving to enhance our export performance through new trade agreements, what measures the government and organizations like the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, what can they really do to help exporters fully leverage the opportunities presented by trade agreements? If you can also touch on that, and also from an SME perspective, since much of your membership potentially comprises SMEs, do you see trade agreements as a promising avenue for expansion? And do you believe SMEs right now are equipped to meet the requirements that Dr. Ganeshamurthy also spoke about that are typically imposed through these trade agreements? If you can also touch these during your opening remarks, that would be great. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And in equal length and breadth, I would wish to thank Mr. Ganeshamurthy also, because he has spelled out many of the things which I wanted to say, and he has made my life that much easier. With what I want to say, I may sound a bit critical, but please accept me. That is all with good intention. And in a forum like this, I think we need to be frank, not to discredit or put down any authorities or anything like that, but at least look at the realistic situation. Yes. We were listening to the eminent speakers before me with intellectual insights to all the free trade agreements, but I will look at it in a more of a practical side. I have not prepared a presentation, but I would speak off the cuff. In terms of the free trade agreements, yes, we have signed a few of those with India, Pakistan, Singapore, and we have just finished one with Thailand, a free trade agreement, and two preferential trade agreements covering few countries. But all those agreements, what we have done, are centered or covering a specific region that is close to our neighborhood, that is Southeast Asia. Furthest has been with Japan. We have not gone anywhere towards Europe, Africa, to North America or South America. If we compare ourselves with Vietnam, of course, that country has a land mass 5 times of Sri Lanka. We have 65,000 square kilometers. They have about 331,000. Also, in terms of population, we have 22 million. They have about 100 million, once again, about 5 times. If we look at the number of countries with which they have signed trade agreements, it's about 66. Ours is about 10 to 12 countries, but also within a specific locality. Looking at these trade agreements, I believe my voice is clear.
Yes, sir, we can hear you well.
All right, okay. Looking at these trade agreements, yes, we need to look at it very objectively. First of all, the trade agreements need to have the government support, and the political will needs to be there. And when I say political will, when we open out our shores, our land, our trade to other countries, there has to be some consistency, and with any change of government or any political changes should not change the policies what we have set up, and there has to be some consistency. So if there is, the previous speaker just spoke that up until about 2005, we had an inward policy, and later on only that we open it out. And I think that what we have opened out should kept open for a while, at least for a long time, without any change on that. Under some of these trade agreements, there is an ideal opportunity that we could do. What 2 countries can't do together, the third country could come in between and make use of 2 trade agreements to see what could be done and to facilitate 2 countries. We all know that there is a trade embargo between India and Pakistan, but at the same time, as a third party, Sri Lanka is there, who have entered into trade agreements between India and Pakistan. So we can act as a conduit between these 2 countries, and I'm not sure to what practical level that we have made use of that opportunity of facilitating that trade between India and Pakistan, of doing trade. But I'm sure rules of origin may be coming into play. I'm not too sure about the technicalities of that, but that is an opportunity. In terms of the implementation of these trade agreements, we have an expert panel who have gone into length and breadth of negotiating with our counterparts and formulating the trade agreements. But the most important thing from there onwards is of implementation, that the implementation has to be done in a manner where they educate the prospective exporters and importers of the opportunities that they have. I'm not too sure whether this exercise has been done to that extent, and whether we have educated our people of the opportunities that we have. Most often, since I'm from the chamber, I hear this music coming from all corners, saying that what are the opportunities, what are the things that we could do, and all that. And that facilitation, that education, that dissemination of information may not be taking place. So what the chamber is doing right at this moment is that we have facilitated such understanding. Soon after the Thai Free Trade Agreement was signed, it is yet to be implemented. The chamber came in as a facilitator, as a conduit between the government who has entered into these free trade agreements and the private sector to work out and also to see what are the opportunities. Ma'am, you asked me what the government or as well as the chamber could do in terms of facilitating and promoting these free trade agreements. If I put the chamber first, what we do is that we have business councils entered between various countries. We have 21 business councils, and all those business councils that we have are covered under this trade agreement with India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan, and all those things. So one thing, what we do is of facilitating the working of those trade agreements through these business councils. That is one thing. Second thing is of also facilitating business delegates between these two countries, having B2B meetings and introducing companies with their counterparts in other countries, and to see what opportunities that they could derive out of these trade agreements and facilitating that. Third is on the SME sector. As we know, the SME sector is a very important sector in our country, which has taken a beating in the recent past due to various economic reasons. But that is the engine of the country. And if we don't look at them then in a very positive way, it will be a disaster. But also at the same time, the SMEs, they have a challenge in complying or falling in line with some of these trade agreements, purely because of lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. The language also matters a lot, because most of them, they are not conversant in this foreign language. The exchange rates, and also the scope, the quantities what they produce may not be sufficient for a transaction under the trade agreement. Under trade agreements, some of the things what we have, or the main thing what we have is tariff concessions, which is at the port of call. But most important is that the product has to be marketable. That product, what we have, what we try to sell, should be of a standard, international standard. It has to be of a product with a certain cost element, which should not, irrespective of the trade barrier, tariffs, the selling price of the product should be competitive. So whether we have that competitiveness in terms of our input costs and the final output of that is a question that we need to look at. So one thing that we need to see is of educating our SME sector and taking it forward. And that needs to be done both with the government as well as with the chamber. And when we say the chamber, it's not with the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, but with all chambers that they need to do that. And especially with the Women Chamber of Commerce, where we have a lot of entrepreneurs, SME entrepreneurs, who are led by women, that needs to be supported. So it is a collective effort that needs to be done. And if we do that, I'm sure we can make use of it. Last thing that we need, I would like to spell out, is that we have signed a free trade agreement with Singapore. And at a meeting that we had, that was in 2018, January, that is roughly about 6 months plus, 6 years plus. I'm not too sure whether we have made good use of that. This was spelled out by one of the leading negotiators of the free trade agreement, and they said that we don't see much opportunities that we have derived out of that, though we have agreed into that free trade agreement. So due to the reason of time, I will stop at this. And also, ma'am, I need to go for another meeting at 4 o'clock. So if you could please excuse me, I would really appreciate that. But my apologies of having to go a bit early than that was expected from me. So.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Mr. 𝗃𝗏, for your time. And also, I think you covered several key issues relating that addressed, I think, the lacuna of information, the lacuna that is present already in information pertaining to how SMEs can make use of these free trade agreements, and of course the issue of evolving competitiveness and the need to embrace competitiveness by SMEs to ensure that they can leverage these trade agreements. So thank you so much.
I'd be more than happy to participate again if there's a need to look at the practical side of it. And to exchange ideas and information from the chamber. I would be more than happy to do that. And please let me know in advance.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. And so we still have with us Dr. Ganeshamurthy. So I want to pose the first question to you, sir. So having already discussed issues relating to these rules of origin requirements, I want to ask you, what do you think are the primary challenges that Sri Lanka is likely to encounter in implementing and complying with these rules, and how these challenges can impact SMEs? And the third part of this question is on whether you have any insights on how other countries have successfully addressed the challenges arising from this rules of origin requirements.
Of course, the rules of origin requirements, as it says, it indicates what is the nationality of that particular good, where the good is coming from. So it has, it depends, the clause, the rules may be depending on the free trade agreement. But there are certain common things that we can understand. One is that the product is wholly obtained from the particular country. Then the rule of origin clause applicable 100%, so they can apply for that concession. Or second, the maybe the component in order to produce that particular product obtained from a non-signatory country, a non-member country, but still it had gone substantial changes from the HS code category, then it can apply for the RO concessions. So especially this type of technical aspects may not be easily visible to the producers and exporters. The research conducted by 800 sample of exporters in one country, and it revealed that less than 20% of the exporters have made use of this concession because they highlighted several reasons why they can't use this. Number one is that they are unaware of which category they belongs to, which category of their good it belongs to, whether they have gone through a kind of a substantial changes in the form, or whether that is outsourced from a country which is not a signatory, which is a not a very substantial part of the product. They allow 10 to 15% of the non-member countries' inputs. But these information are not easily passed on to the exporters or producers. The chambers like our friend just left, they can actually provide a lot of inputs into this, and maybe the SME sector can benefit out of it, because to provide the correct information at the right time, free of charge. And then if there is a mechanism required, kind of a support required, the supporting mechanism has to be available anytime. So one of the concerns raised in this regard was SMEs, they apply whether this is applicable to my product, and to get an answer, they have to wait for longer period of time. The time duration it takes to determine whether it is a subject to that concession or not, it will require more time. So this administrative bottlenecks and time-consuming exercises has to be minimized, and then the SME sector may engage in that. But SME sector, not everyone is conversant to these languages, what you call the technical language. So some sort of support should be required at the regional level. So not everyone can come and get those support from the institutions located in Colombo. With the internet facilities, this information, especially the application forms, the list of goods that are going under this concession, so those information can be put onto the internet and made available free of charge to the exporters. So the SME sector should be educated how could they obtain this preferential tariffs. But this is actually they are applying under the MFN tariff clause. So they are paying a higher tariff. They could have obtained either free of charge or lower tariff for their exports. So most of the time, this cumbersome exercise they are undergoing in order to get that concession, the concession they are getting is value of the concession they are getting must be very much lower than the hassle they go through. So they are comparing these two aspects, and they decide, okay, why should I bother about this? It will take time. So I will pay whatever the duties the consumer they are paying, let them pay, and then I'll export. Decide my price accordingly. So these are practical aspects of problems which an exporter can face from the SME sector. So the solutions are very clear. There should be a proper administrative process, and the process should be not very lengthy, very short. There should be support, there should be staff, there should be internet-based application forms, and the time consuming should be minimized. Then, of course, we can bring in the SME sector into this. Some other countries in the Southeast Asian region, they are doing it, providing those information to the relevant chambers, provide those information to the exporters, and they are supporting also. So this may improve if we can arrange a proper mechanism in the country.
Thank you, Dr. Ganeshamurthy, for that elaborate answer. And with that, I'm going to take a turn and ask Mr. Vibhlendra on, so with the recent negotiations that we have undertaken, so we know that you also raised during your opening remarks that there have been that there are usually some common concerns raised by stakeholders, particularly SMEs and the general public regarding trade agreements. As negotiators, how do you balance these stakeholder concerns with the potential benefits that could be gained from these agreements? Can you share your experiences regarding the same?
Yeah, thank you. I think we can see the concern or the stakeholder concern or public concern. We can classify or look at from three perspectives. One is the negative concerns, other one is the protective concerns, other one is the third one is the positive concerns. So generally the negative concerns, sometimes it is rather difficult to deal with. So most of the time we try to see the protective concerns where they feel some imminent threats may come because of the FTAs. So that is in a way, now as per my experience, lack of understanding due to lack of information reach out them is built up. Therefore, we try to provide the proper informations with the one-to-one discussion, something in the stakeholder consultation process. Then they understand the issues, how they understood without data and with the data. So where most of the time they are getting EC, that is one process we are doing. Second one, sometimes as per the discussion with them, they don't expect the lifelong protection. So they want until they get transformed or they get ready to the integration, they need some sort of a protection or some sort of a facilitation to them. So in that case, we have a mechanism, even if you take the tariff liberalization program, we have many mechanisms. We can adopt the negative list approach, we can see the sensitive list approach, and also we can backload it. And the fourth one, we can determine the durations. So the last with the Thailand, we had a very good experience. They said they want 5 to 8 years period to get ready to the competitive level. So then what we did, those kind of industries we put into the backloading process. And there are certain industries related to agriculture value addition and the fisheries value addition, we put into the negative list. So that is the way we can address their concerns in a way. Positive concerns are almost, they are very emphasized to get ready, shorten the period of tariff liberalization and take these goods into the positive list, some way they will come out with. So that is in a way favor to us. But we need to address mostly in the majority also the protective concerns from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Vibhlendra, for that answer. So with that, there are a lot of questions, and I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions as well. And we've tried to take a few of the questions that have popped up. Nevertheless, as also suggested by Mr. 𝗃𝗍𝗶, hopefully this is food for thought, not only for the audience, but also for the Center for Banking Studies to have yet another session on around the same topic and perhaps the practical perspectives on the same. On that note, as we conclude our panel discussion on trade agreements unlocking economic potential for Sri Lanka, on behalf of the Center for Banking Studies and the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our keynote speaker and esteemed panelists for providing us with a deeper understanding of the complexities and opportunities that trade agreements present for Sri Lanka. Your contributions have been invaluable, and we are extremely grateful for the time and effort you have dedicated to this important conversation. Our sincere gratitude as well to our audience who have joined us via Zoom and other social media platforms. Let me also take this opportunity to invite you to follow the Central Bank of Sri Lanka on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn to receive updates on similar awareness and outreach programs, and of course, other key updates on developments across the macroeconomy and the financial system. With a note of thanks to the Center of Banking Studies for their invitation to the Economic Research Department to moderate today's session, and of course, my colleagues at the Economic Research Department. Thank you all so much. Today's discussion has underscored the critical role of strategic trade agreements in driving Sri Lanka's economic growth. So let's carry forward the insights gained and work together towards a prosperous future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a pleasant evening ahead, and we look forward to meeting you again in yet another interesting session. Thank you so much.